Hi, everybody. Welcome back to episode 6 of LabTalks. My name is Ben Putley. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Alchemy Exchange, and it is my pleasure today to be joined by Claire. Claire, would you like to introduce yourself? This is actually, before you do that, I think your hat-trick appearance on Alchemy. You've had a podcast, a panel, and a podcast.
Oh, God, yeah, no.
Should have got your football.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
Thank you for having me 3 times
No.
to come and, pollute your airwaves. I'm Claire Gleeson-Landry. I'm Head of Investment and Sustainable Media at GoodLoop. Thanks for having me.
Hey, no, thank you for coming down. We're in the dark room again, staring at the bright lights, so it's great. So, yeah. What I wanted to talk to, right, just mic issues, it's fine.
Very professional.
So we've both worked in Adtech for quite a while now. And we've seen a lot of things come and go. I think I started in like the first year of the mobile and then lived through 7 more. Maybe it still is.
Still waiting.
Yeah, I don't know. Who knows? But I think what I would like to talk about is, what do you think, what have you seen go wrong in the time that you kind of worked in the ad tech space? You've been at publishers, ad tech, kind of everywhere in between. It'd be good to get your take on the issues, as it were.
Yeah, historically I was publisher side and actually very print focused, which was super binary, I guess. There were lots of very sort of tight parameters within which you can operate, Paginations are very fixed unless you have a very amenable production manager who can swing extra paper getting on a ship or something like that. It's always quite sweet and old school. But about 13 years ago, I went over to The Guardian, which was actually my first experience of properly working in digital. I sort of remember some weird training that I received when I was at Bauer, like a decade before, which was so primitive. And actually, there's probably still quite a lot of those practices that we were taught that are still used now. But certainly as my role progressed, publisher side, I became a lot more aware of the impact of ad tech. And whereas historically The Guardian had been very sort of, you have an agency sales team that just deals with the agencies, more and more people were being introduced to the department who had really specific specialist skills. And then that became the sort of way. And so there was a lot that was done in terms of trying to upskill people who had quite, binary way of trading digital media. And then when I left The Guardian, because I couldn't handle daily news cycles, because I realise now that I've probably actually got ADHD, and that's why I really could cope with like a daily shit. We've got to get this done by 5 o'clock. And then I moved over to GoodLoop when it was still, it'd been going for about 3 years, but it was still quite small, and I really wanted to work somewhere. I'd worked at big organisations before, and I really wanted to sort of go work small and be a big fish. And so the learning for me over that time has been really, really interesting, because previously I'd only sort of like been exposed to what I needed to know from a publisher perspective. And, I worked, I was always, because I was so mouthy and gobby, I was always put on all the working groups around like brand safety and how we battle the blunt tools that are available in the industry. And some things haven't changed. And that's what's really, I think, some of the most frustrating things for me within this industry is that there's no incentive for change.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's, I always wrestle with this. It's like we predominantly buy and sell ads on the internet, but there's not really been a huge amount of innovation. I have this stupid joke where it's like Drake has this song where it's called Portland, which came out in like 2016. And he's talking about an iPhone 6 and one of his friends has it. That's still the standard that we use for OpenRTB is, what are we on? iPhone 14 now. So that is 8 iPhones ago. And we're still on the same standard of trading ads. And if you think about what the iPhone 6 couldn't do versus what the iPhone 14 can now do, there's something not quite hitting that's meant that no one has, okay, maybe there is a different way of doing it. And I think you kind of touched upon it when you were saying like probably the way in which print is being sold today, probably not too dissimilar to the way it was sold today. And I think you're still dealing with those same businesses that are buying ads. So like, you're right, there is no incentive to change, but I think now there's a lot of pushes that didn't necessarily exist before. I mean, the impending cookie apocalypse, whether it does happen this year or not, remains to be seen. It's kind of got a feeling of the year of the mobile about it. But that I think will be like one of the most significant push factors, rather than people like GoodLoop, people like Alchemy saying like, come and do things our way, think about things slightly differently. Whereas now it's like, you got to do something differently. And that will be interesting to see play out if it does play out.
I think there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of intention, which I think is the beginning of behavior change. But yeah, you can sometimes feel like you're just out there going, guys, there is genuinely a better way of doing this, and none of you are listening. And we can demonstrate and we can prove results, but the current sort of media buying model is so tied to, again, quite old school ways of trading media, right? Like, if you do not have a trading agreement, you are probably getting access to a very tiny percentage of budget that's up for pitch, as it were. And you're competing against so many different players within that market. And you can quickly be put into a box of too complicated, don't understand, or I don't have the right brief for this. And kind of talking about publishing as well, like when I was exclusively working in print buyers had to be specialists in understanding the landscape of publishing. They had to know what a newspaper or a magazine stood for and reflected, and they were very good at being able to match those things, and that specialism knowledge has completely evaporated because of the sort of spray and pray, don't really care as long as I get my results. The brand doesn't really care. The brand just wants to see this at this price, and so that sort of like nuance has been completely eradicated, which is really frustrating, because you can be, as a salesperson, just talking about all the benefits of buying your product. But if it's a little bit more expensive, or it's a little harder to do, or whatever, there's no sort of like, oh, I think I'll go out on a limb and I'll try this. And, you know, people within agencies, because of those trading agreements and the sort of machine of agencies, it's really hard to put your head above the parapet and advocate.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and also I do feel for agencies, because there is so much choice. I think you can become almost a little bit paralyzed somewhat in terms of what do I choose? And then they're up against tight deadlines. So it's like, well, let's just do what we did last time because it worked pretty well. And I totally sympathize with it. But I think, as I was saying, my Drake's iPhone analogy, you do need to like change. It has to evolve, right? Like, I think there is external macro factors that are changing. There's like the way in which you buy media is changing somewhat. And I think, and then equally, like the way that you measure it based off of the channel is completely different. It's like you don't get the same kind of insights on who saw it, how they engaged with it for the length of time, how much of the content did they watch on an outdoor ad or a print ad.
I had this exact conversation with someone from a outdoor, out of home company yesterday, and she was like trying to understand the carbon footprint of a screen on a 1-to-many ratio versus a 1-to-1 ratio on an iPhone 14 is really, really complicated.
Yeah, I bet.
And digital out of home and benefits from still kind of being measured in the same way that out of home is measured, even though that there's a load of technology underpinning it as well. And that will come. It's iterative, but it still feels like 10 years ago, which is kind of nice. They're in that bubble where they're kind of impervious from that kind of scrutiny, because it's not transparent, allegedly transparent. And it feels like the halcyon days of just trading print. Just like, I'll just use my national readership survey data. Yeah,
because it's funny. It's like, I always think like the TfL is and for people not in the UK, that's people that run the tube, gets you from A to B, but also it's just a massive ad network. And I don't think they've ever like understood that as a business model. And like, if they did up the ability to buy and sell ads on tubes, you'd probably solve a whole load of issues that plague the tubes right now. It'd be a bit cleaner, be fewer mice maybe, but a bit more on time.
So screens within
Yeah,
trains?
Exactly. Because I think sometimes you go onto a tube station in like Zone 3, this is a real tangent, but and you like see an ad in April for something on Valentine's Day.
Yeah. Again, it's that really old school sweet. It's kind of like a funny sweet cottage industry in many ways.
Yeah.
But can I just point out a flaw? You can't have loads of screens on tubes. The carbon footprint.
That is true. Yeah. True. Maybe I was going to say solar powered, but that's no good, is it? There must be some connected. That is completely irrelevant. Let's get back to what we're supposed to be talking about. So yeah, if we go back to the digital side of things, it's kind of guess where we both specialize. What do you see as the issues that, aside from, I guess carbon is a big one, but then aside from carbon, like what is kind of creating the inefficiencies in the market that you see at the moment? If you think there are any.
There are loads.
Yeah.
I think what's frustrating is we've utilized a technology that was intended for remnant inventory to become the mainstay, and it has been adopted without any kind of real evolution. Just loads of things have been bolted on, and all those extra bolt-ons drive massive inefficiency because obviously private companies generate those opportunities, and there's no incentive for collaboration, right? There's never any moment of like, we can do it, but should we be doing it, right? Because capitalism. Yeah. And whilst there are a lot of like well-intentioned companies and organizations that want to be able to provide cookieless solutions, better transparency, et cetera, it always has to be a bit of a make good. And no snagging gets done, right? There's a kind of like, it's a bit of a sort of, to start off with, a bit of a mechanical Turk, and that's the nature of like building new innovation, right? You have to kind of get an MVP and then hopefully get some investment and then really drive that kind of innovation, which is really exhausting. And also people lose interest, right? People want to have perfect solutions, which is really interesting. Actually, I talk about, like, I quite often get pulled into this conversation around carbon, about having a perfect solution. And yet we're running on an industry that absolutely is not, we're running on infrastructure that is absolutely not perfect. Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of sort of picking and choosing about what we scrutinize. And, my day-to-day job is very much focused on carbon, and it's easy for it to be an easy one to pick off because the truth hurts, right? Yeah. And people are cautious and, are scared about opening a Pandora's box and kind of kick it down the road for another little while.
Yeah, it's like next quarter, we'll figure that out. And then it's like before you know it, that was last year, So I think, it is, there is a lot going on in the just infrastructure in general in the world. I was reading about NVIDIA's new chips, which seem pretty serious and take up way less space, can reduce the cost of machine learning by half. I think that is where you will see a lot of advancements. But again, I was paraphrasing a podcast someone told me about, so this may not be that accurate, but with the way they are with the technology, they're almost at like a molecular level of how small the parts in a chip can be, and there's not much, it can't get much smaller than where they are at now with these chips. So the processing, let's say, is as powerful as it's going to be for now until there's like a big leap in what people think about. Maybe that is AI, but it's on every other podcast out there, so go listen to those ones about AI. And I think that you can just change the way in which transactions are taking place, which is, again, why I love blockchain, because it does that. And I think that there's a lot of kind of soft or qualitative things that create more emissions or cost or inefficiencies that can be solved. Like the smart contract is a really cool way of just like completing a transaction inside of 20 minutes, which if you are like a individual that's trying to send something from A to B, that is quite slow. But I think what people often don't realize is that when they're using Monzo and they send money from A to B, that's not really the whole transaction that's taking place. That's your part of the transaction that you care about. But like, there is then the international banking settlements, there's reconciliation, there's remittance, and like, there's loads of fees that you don't necessarily pay for, but that are incumbent within that transaction. I think that is true for ad transactions en masse, which does then make everything inefficient. And you have got more people going to work. And do you know what I mean? That's where it all kind of bubbles up from. Is like, it's not purely just auction takes place, ad is served on publisher. No. That's all the carbon created. There's like everything around it. And I think if you can make the rails a bit smarter, then you probably do have this knock-on impact on making everything else a bit more efficient, and everyone can trade more easily, and we're all reading off the same hymn sheet, and just, everything becomes more effective, basically. And you have ideally fewer ads, right? And then there's less emissions anyway, because they're more anyway, it kind of snowballs on. I think but
it's really hard to trigger that attitude change and then the behavior change.
Yeah, true.
And I think people get it. They get it. But as we said, it's hard to really shift the dial on those things.
Yeah.
And it's hard to be confronted with challenging information that completely destroys the way you've been working for the previous 10, 12 years.
Yeah, I agree. and I can imagine, like, when you go in and you talk to your partners about GoodLoop, you're probably one of 5 meetings they've had that day.
Yeah.
And the others partners maybe aren't dialing up reducing emissions as much as you are. So like, you are a small percentage of the overall conversations they have in a day, and then multiply that over a week.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that is quite challenging just to deal with on a regular basis.
Some of the things that we sort of get challenged with at GoodLoop is like, oh, we don't have a purpose-led brief. And it's like, it doesn't need to be.
Yeah.
It doesn't, your creative doesn't need to say we're really nice. Sort of the donation element that we do with our consumer facing formats, etc., are just super powered by Good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Right. They're turbocharged, and they drive an outcome. And that's what we are trying to trade on more, is like, what is it that you're wanting to achieve from your campaign? Forget about the mechanic in which we do it. What you're trying to achieve, and we'll give you something that will help you do that. And whether that's, consumer facing formats, or whether that's curation of deals, like, what is the outcome that you want? And then the measurement piece that we offer is a sort of like a first pass. Okay, measurement is kind of like, I was saying this earlier on, if you're in a house fire, you don't need to know how hot it is, right?
Yeah.
You just need solutions. You need the fire brigade to come and help put it out, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the shift that we're trying to drive, is like, measurement and accountability and transparency is just the first hurdle. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah. So I think I'd like you to talk me through that a little bit more. Like, what does that look like when you're speaking to a brand about, let's say, like, transparency, for example? Is that predominantly the supply path that you start to look at that point?
Yeah, it's a host of things. I think first things first, it's and some clients will want to have more knowledge. I think we're building an iteration on our solution that is based on basically, like, depending on what your comfort levels are in terms of the data that you give us, you're going to get more granular. Obviously, the more data you give us, the better. And some clients will just want to know the top line. Yeah. Right. In the same way with you guys, like, some clients just want to know what the revenue saving is to be used on more active media.
Yep.
They don't really care about how they get there. Whereas some will be a lot more leaned in. So we talk a lot about, with our consumer facing products, we're very, very transparent about where those run. And I guess sometimes, like, having a media side of the business as well as a measurement side of the business can kind of be a bit there can be a bit of friction there.
Okay.
But like we do use the open market to be able to trade our media. But what we deliver as a consequence of that is not only reputation management for the brand, but also the charity that features on those creatives. So we do have to be really, really selective. And then there are multiple reputations at stake there. And then we also want to make sure that publishers get a really fair price for their media. For, what is quite rare inventory, because we are a video first solution. We have, we can do formats for digital out of home and connected TV and everything like that. But we've always, our legacy of the business has been a video solution. Yeah. And video obviously is a huge abundance of video available online at any point in time. And then there's the conflict, right? Yeah. We also work in a carbon measurement space, but we're not a carbon measurement company, if that makes sense. So we have to be really conscious that the campaigns that we deliver on behalf of our clients follow the same rules, boundaries that we expect the rest of the industry to do to improve their carbon.
Okay, understood.
So yeah, you can tie yourself in quite existential knots around that.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, and then again, once you kind of throw in user experience, I think they are often I think in our industry they're quite often the silent party. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's who we're trying to speak to. We're trying to get people's perceptions to change of brand X, the purchase intent to change of brand Y, but it ends up being a very small percentage of like feedback from the people. And often it's just the publisher that bears the brunt of that through readership that starts to decline. Yeah. And again, if they're not getting fair prices, they're like, well, we need to show more ads. But then people are going to get more annoyed, and then maybe we'll do a paywall. And I think that for some publications that works, for others it's just like unthinkable. Yeah. So I think it's a really challenging position right now. And also some of these publishers, like The Guardian, I worked at News UK, they've still got print newspapers, and it would be like unthinkable to be like, hey, maybe we don't print the newspaper anymore. Like it's like that is part of what they do. Yeah, exactly. They could never ever do that. And then there's other publishers that don't have that challenge, and then you're fighting Meta on that, and TikTok, like other people that are publishers but are, it's like, it is tough to be a publisher right now. And I think you do end up, it's probably what we've seen, where you just like, okay, they were maybe 5-6 years ago middle of the left and middle of the right, and now they've gone, right, okay, we've got to go that way, because we've got to either annoy people or have people really agree. Yeah. And then they'll see our ads. Eyeballs.
And this sort of disassociation of people, we look at them as consumers, we look at them as an audience when we work in our little weird bubble of media, and we forget that actually if I get sent an article that's been published by a certain news group, I'm not reading it because I can't see it. But our industry has forced that. Yeah. Our industry has forced that shortcut, short-term, remedial sort of behaviour that then becomes just the way. Yeah. When I was at The Guardian, we turned on ad refresh, and I was like, why? Because we had numbers to hit, right? And it was a short-term strategy for one quarter that just became bloody gold. Yeah. But our yields dropped as a consequence. And then, you're onboarding more and more SSPs and the resellers that are attached to all of that. All of this ladders up to just like utterly ineffective ways of doing things because of how the ecosystem is constructed. It's opaque by design or by accident, actually. It's just no one's really thinking about it, or wasn't. And now we're in this position whereby we're trying to backpedal all the time, but that takes a really long time. Yeah. And to rebuild things and fix things and change behavior and change, give the why. Yeah. When it's worked for so long before.
And I think this is
because this is quite existential, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Quite enjoying it. Yeah, we are. I'm 100% weird, yeah, without a doubt. I think this is where and this is a bit of like a blockchain specific term, but there's this idea right now, or it's something called DePIN, which is decentralized physical infrastructure networks. And what that is that people that really had no right to or interest in providing bandwidth, transactional bandwidth, compute bandwidth to a network in exchange for some kind of return. So there's a really prevalent project in the AI space called BitTensor. They have a token called Tau. You can run these things called subnets, where you are basically running servers to help AI learn. So you're providing compute power for machine learning, which then businesses can then pay you something for without having to go like full bore on buying the servers and the server farm and maintaining it and so on and so on. And that's where I think that the internet in general, as well as like publishing businesses, agencies, ad tech businesses, would really benefit from being able to take that cost of running these servers off of their balance sheet, so they could take a bit less of a margin and be a bit more transparent about what's going on. It's where like distributed ledger technology plus this idea of the average person, like the silent participant that is involved in the ad auction, sees an ad every single day. Like, I think the amount of people that have been exposed to an ad, but then you see that consent notice and there's like 200 companies that they've never heard of, could really start to provide some value. It won't be everyone. It'll be like 1% of people that are like, hey, I'm going to provide some value back to the internet to keep the information free so everyone can access it. And it will just start to like level everything out in terms of like publishers get a bit of a higher CPM and ad tech vendors can share more of that revenue, and then advertisers get a better value for the media they're getting. Maybe get more media, and you kind of go back to this idea of like a fair value pricing, because I think like an advertiser would tell you that industry is overvalued or media is overpriced, and a publisher would tell you the opposite story. And it's like, how can those two things be congruent? Because advertisers buying publisher inventory. So it's really exciting that technology, I think, is finally going to outstrip Drake's song to really keep that thread going through this. Millie's shaking her head as she normally does. And I'm reading the whiteboard, which she hates. But I think I'm personally very excited about there's this. Cookies are going to change the way that people are buying ads. That will change people's behavior one way or another. And if you can not like nail the UX, so it's not too dissimilar to the way that people were buying ads in the past, people will like naturally change their behavior. It's why I think Facebook then, but Meta now, kicked off in the way it did, is because people were doing it on their desktop computer and then they just did it on their phone. Mm-hmm. The user experience didn't necessarily change. It just became like better. So you weren't saying like, stop doing that, start doing this. It was like,
it's a natural
just
evolution,
try and change what you're doing slightly.
I think I saw a brilliant meme the other day, I think on the love of Huns, and it said,
don't follow them.
I think you should.
Maybe
because
I should.
This was great.
Yeah.
It said, I don't care about your cookies, hun.
Yeah.
I just want to see Peter Andre's luxury mansion in Surrey.
Yeah.
And like, people don't care just to a certain extent, but there's a growing audience of people that do understand the value of their data.
Totally, yeah. I completely agree.
And how do you give them control of that? And they're a savvy minority.
Yeah.
The majority of people on the internet, not consumers, people, citizens, don't give a shit.
No.
They want to see Peter Andre's luxury mansion
over a puddle that day. Yeah.
And as with everything, with things like, regulation, GDPR is just one of those things that, again, even though we knew it was coming for such a long time, then this sort of imperfect solution of like making it harder for people to consume your content is so I don't know, it's the opposite of what you're trying to achieve.
It's counterintuitive, yeah. And I think this is why this time might be a bit different, is that the European ad market is a bit of a minnow compared to the American ad market, and GDPR didn't really affect America.
Absolutely not.
Kind of, so they were like, just won't work there anymore. It doesn't really affect us. And I think this is where the cookies disappearing will be very different. It will, because I remember when GDPR turned on or came into effect, you just couldn't track ads anymore. Like, you didn't even know it, like, if it had been, you couldn't even drop an impression pixel on. People like, what the hell do we do now? And that feasibly, like, first party data, maybe not so, but like third party data, which is like impression tracking, click tracking, the stuff that you need to ensure that an ad has been seen or clicked on by someone to prove that it existed, right? Otherwise it'll be a free-for-all. It's going to stop potentially overnight when these third parties disappear from Google Chrome finally. And if you kind of say, right, the ad market, digital ad market in the US is, let's call it $300 billion, or let's call it $364 billion, so the maths is easier. If it stops overnight, then every day that you can't target an ad that way, that's $1 billion. And then the next day that's $2 billion. And people will be like, we need to figure this out right now.
Yeah.
And I think it will take kind of the weight of all that ad spend to push people into a new solution, try stuff out they weren't, perhaps change their behavior somewhat. And I think that is what I'm actually quite excited about, is that it will force innovation in a way that we've not seen for a long time.
Yeah. And in a way that regulation hasn't been able to do.
Exactly
right?
that. Yeah.
I guess, if the volume of transactions that were happening in programmatic were happening within the finance industry, within every second or whatever, there would be much sort of tighter regulation. But because it's relatively small beans, there's less scrutiny.
Totally, yeah.
And also, I mean, you only have to see, like, when there are hilarious sort of interviews of tech giant CEOs, there's the famous ones of like those Americans who are just like, can you see me through my phone kind of thing? Yeah. Like and then also how the TikTok CEO was being scrutinized a couple of months ago. Lawmakers are absolutely clueless. Yeah. And so regulation is always going to be way behind. Yeah.
Because I think it's like, as long as you're not like advertising vapes to kids, you kind of do what you want, really, which is like bananas when you think about the size of the ad market and the amount of dollars that change hands. It's like, fraud is a separate subject, but if like the amount of, I actually don't know what the percentages are, but so maybe I won't say that because it could be completely wrong, but I can imagine like, my thought was, if it's a high percentage of fraud, a decent percentage of fraud in the ad market, if that was similar in financial markets, they'd be like, right, okay, that's not happening anymore. We're going to completely change that. And people would work with regulators in a way that they definitely do in advertising, but it's just like, again, it is very tricky because you've got like a European-wide law, and like each of those markets operate very, very differently as individuals. Culturally, financially, even the way you consume content in different markets is very different. I think it's very hard to like regulate that en masse in those very kind of specific different regions of how they do deals, or how media's bought, or like the readership of newspapers in Spain versus France versus the UK. It's like it's a tough job.
I remember when I was at The Guardian and ad blocking really reared its head, and we realised how distinct the culture was across Europe in terms of usage of ad blockers, and how high it was in Germany, because historically and culturally they're like, why do you want my information? Yeah. And it's really, really interesting, those nuances between markets and preference for platform and everything like that. God, we are really, really
let's get
meandering.
Back on track. Where are we at?
God.
So we started off on supply paths and we ended up talking about Germany. That's cool though.
I'm half German, so it's fine. It's
people often
why
think
I wear socks with my Birkenstocks.
I was in Germany and people were talking to me in German. I'm like, I'm English. Sorry, mate. I was in Munich. But I think
you can edit this, right?
Yeah. No, we'll do it live. This is great. So I think we've talked a little bit about transparency, the inventory supply path, amongst other things. We haven't, I guess we did touch on the user experience. So like, How do you at GoodLoop try and package that up into an approach that is like easy to understand, quite snackable, unified, if you will, when you're putting together these campaigns? And like, have you had any really good success stories that you want to talk about of someone that really gets in, is doing really well, and
you'd
love to work with?
I guess there has to, as with everything, it takes a long time to bring people on that journey and doing things differently. I think the volume of repeat business that we have is testament to the fact that clients, once they get it, they get it. And we spend a lot of time working with them. We don't work with them on the actual creative itself.
Okay.
But we build units using their creatives that first and foremost need to be respectful to the person viewing it on the internet. There is an implicit value exchange for that person on the internet who knows how valuable their eyeballs and their data is. Secondly, having quite a lot of the good things, like one of the frustrating things about video is quite often you can be watching a video advert and you have to wait till the end of the video advert to know who the brand is, right? Whereas with our formats, it signposts it right from the get-go. And that sort of, that the value of a person's time is recognized and rewarded. And then what happens as a consequence is obviously more time is spent with that brand. So trust, hopefully, is increased, more intent to purchase, comfort with paying more for a product because it's perceived value. And so there are a couple of big brands that work with us now across all of our solutions. General Mills with their brand Nature Valley, ostensibly cereal bar. Yeah. Great.
Good cereal bars though.
They are nice. And very much designed so this is about when you capture a brand's purpose and you bring that purpose to the foreground, right? And this is what I love about advertising, not tech. Yeah. What I love about good adverts, right? And that's what we also really, really forget within our industry. Of 100% of a digital budget, 10% goes on creative, and all the awards are awarded on that, right? Cannes Lions coming up, et cetera, et cetera. Look at all these incredible creatives. 90% of that budget is spent on how it's delivered. Yeah. And no one really knows. Yeah. That's weird. It is and a bit of weird, that 90%, 60% of it is going to Meta, Google and Amazon, right? So this is where it gets really, really interesting. So Nature Valley, cereal bar, they want you to get out into nature, right? Take this cereal bar, don't eat breakfast at your table, just grab it and go. Yeah. Enjoy the great outdoors. So Nature Valley have also open sourced the manufacturing they provided basically the designs for their first truly recyclable wrapper that they've made available to everyone within that consumer packaged goods sector.
Oh, really?
If you want to change, because obviously they're always lined with something plasticky. They've open sourced that. So that's like a value of theirs. Yeah. Enjoy the world, nature and all it has to offer, especially in a country like America, which is incredible in terms of its diversity and everything, like not its diversity of people. They're not great with that. Incredible is the wrong word. Diversity of nature and what's available. And then so they've worked with us in terms of leveraging that message about getting out in nature. They've worked with us to restore trails through our Watch to Donate formats nice. And our This Ad Does Good formats. That's reintroduced loads of bison to the area. The knock-on effects are so interesting.
Yeah, that is crazy.
And then they've worked with us they've used our Planet packages, which is curated. I mean, love it. We're back to curation. Yeah. It's almost as if, editorial is really important.
It is quite important, yeah.
And yet we've driven, publishers and journalists down this cheese wedge of nightmarishness. Yeah. And so through our Planet packages, we've been running their campaigns, which don't have a consumer-facing message about donations. It's just their standard formats. Against low carbon inventory, and we've delivered 36% less emissions as a consequence of that. And then they've also used our Good Measures technology to measure absolutely everything else outside of GoodLoop. So they've used us to measure every other line item on their campaign. And through that, we've raised money to do a lot of restoration projects as well. And so that's like a gorgeous example. And also massive increase in intent to purchase, trust in the brand, all those brand metrics that ultimately CMOs are trying to deliver and battling against procurement people who want everything cheap, right? So it's a perfect narrative arc for them whereby you take what they stand for and you pull it to the front. And so that's a really awesome example of how the various products that we have at GoodLoop all kind of interconnect.
Yeah, that's really nice.
And, you know, our Good Measures product fuels our curation packages. All the work that we've done in terms of assessing publishers fuels that. Then we've got the consumer part, which we can also deliver against those packages, those curated deals as well. So there's a sort of multi-layered approach in that respect. And yeah, they're a long-standing partner of us, and every year that grows and grows and grows. And other General Mills brands are like, want a bit of that.
That sounds pretty cool, yeah.
Yeah. How do we do this?
So it's still, I guess, like word of mouth almost once you have like a case study like that.
Yeah, so it's kind of, land and expand.
Yeah,
you
makes
find,
sense, yeah.
And, you know, having a sort of a brand direct, we of course work with agencies, and actually that's a massive learning for us in the States. You just go brand in America.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the payment model with agencies. They're on retainers over there rather than taking a percentage of trade.
Right, okay.
So, you know, if I've been pulled up by a UK agency about talking to a brand, like, and I mentioned it to my colleague who's in New York, he's like, that would never happen.
Really?
Here. I'm like, God damn you, it's so much easier.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, capitalism.
Yeah.
But, you know,
it's easy when you have a continent of eyeballs to advertise to, though, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, it's you know, it's a good continent of eyeballs to have because the budgets are so much bigger.
Yeah.
And they're able to weather the shocks that we've been experiencing over here in the UK and in Europe over the past couple of years, which just keep on coming.
Yeah.
So that's a really good example of when we work with, you know, a sort of environmental brand in that respect. But you know, we cover absolutely every, you know, any environmental or social cause can be supported. You know, we do a lot around like women's vaginal health. For a while, that was like my main campaign. My main client was Caniston, and I was like, yeah, Queen of Caniston.
Sounds like a bar around here, doesn't it?
Really does. So yeah, like brands that get it. And brands that don't still see the benefit because they're getting better performance.
Yeah.
You know, they're getting better performance, they're getting more accountability, they're getting transparency, and they're also getting to do some good when their brand may not necessarily have a massive, like, good, like, pillar.
And how do you find it with publishers? Do they, I guess they're on board with it, they're getting better value?
Yeah, because they're getting better performance as well. You know, videos and display ads running on their sites are going to get better performance metrics. You know, higher view through rates, and whether that's, you know, and that's a combination of, you know, a better user experience in terms of the format that they're seeing, but also the content within which they're seeing it and the context within which they're seeing it. And they get a really fair price for their inventory, as opposed to like, because we don't really we basically make sure that they're getting a really tasty CPM because we trade on a cost per completed view in that respect. So, you know, that's the sort of secret sauce in many ways. And so, yeah, publishers see the benefit
and that's
massively.
And you said that's open marketplace.
Yeah. With some, we have some preferred deals as well.
Because I think the open marketplace can sometimes be a bit of a swear word, but like, you want a liquid market, right? Like you want there to be a lot of things that you could potentially buy. Like it's a very big crypto thing, right? You have meme coins that are really illiquid and people lose loads of money. And what you really want is a really liquid token that people can trade very easily because it's better for the end user effectively. And in this example, it is the publisher, and the publisher has a ton of open marketplace inventory that kind of gets chopped up and then not filled. It's like, oh, maybe someone else would have bought that there. And I think that across the board, if you could do a better job at providing more value for open marketplace inventory, which sounds like you're doing at the moment, I think everything would just become open marketplace, and you target how you want to target, you find who you want to find, and then you pay the fair value for it. And then it's a bit more, stuff would just move a bit more liquidly, more liquid, whatever. Fluidly. Nice. Yeah. Fluidly. Yeah. And I think that again would like help to solve some of the inefficiencies that exist. And you'd have like probably fewer partners to deal with, because like, it's just, here's our inventory and you can buy it, basically. Like, we'll still sell some of it direct because we understand our readership and the content we create, and it would kind of allow for more really good creative work. You know, so I think I used to do a lot of work with CNN. They had a really good content studio. That is a fantastic business for them because they understand their audience. They've got a team of experts on creating content that's really good, and they spend a ton of money on it, and then it performs really well, and it's like just really nice sponsored content, and that's a cool way of advertising.
I think that's just it though, right? When you work with quality publishers, if you work in an agency, you may not necessarily be aware of all those overheads that require people and require money. But at the same time, like, loads of stuff has been happening recently around MFAs. And how do you score an MFA, right? Because there's also an argument that there are lots of small, unrepresented voices online. Where they don't have an agency sales team. They don't have a really sophisticated stack. They're just like, ugh. And they're trying to monetize underrepresented voices and communities. And those will fall into an MFA category. So does that mean that we end up with an internet that's just published by white middle class people, right? And that poses another massive challenge in terms of having a free and fair internet, right? And equity at every level, and diversity and equity, inclusion and belonging, right? If those voices, and then quite often it's those marginalized voices, whether it be by race or sexuality or whatever, whichever community that you are part of, will quite often fall into those quite prehistoric block lists, right? You can have a brand that is out there supporting Pride, changing its logo to assorted rainbow colours, but then putting LGBTQIA on its block list, right? So you inadvertently defund voices that should be represented on the internet. So I'll be interested to sort of understand a little bit more around the MFA piece that's coming out into our industry, because obviously then the flip side is, of course, that those MFA sites are also responsible for a huge amount of carbon because of the huge amount of auctions that's going on. So that requires a bit of delving on my part. Juicy.
Because we've experienced that actually with we're onboarding a lot of crypto publications, which I think where they're so focused on the Web3 side of the world, they've kind of forgotten that there's a ton of revenue that can be made from Web2 monetization. And we speak to brands and we actually just try and, because I think sometimes the word crypto gets the wrong. People think it's like, oh, that's cryptic, I don't understand it. But crypto is that's cryptographically secured, so it's really hard to access that information. So we just call it blockchain. It makes more sense. And then it's like, okay, you have very like tech savvy audiences that are like understand community building in a slightly different way. There's like a much more free flowing backwards and forwards between someone creating content and someone consuming content in a way that you don't really even see on like social media necessarily. Like there's just really like tons of really interesting subcultures that exist in like Discord and Telegram, and then like on the surface on these crypto websites where people go and get information, then they bring it back down to wherever they're discussing it. And sometimes brands just aren't interested in crypto because they heard that someone committed a scam one time, which is bad. It shouldn't happen, and it is true.
But yet there are scams happening every single day in Web2.
Right? Yeah. Like the people generally launder cash using cash, not crypto. Like I think if you look at anything, it's like, people are creating laundrettes. They're not accepting Bitcoin. They're accepting money, you know? So it's a funny brush to try and tar it with, given that it's true for everyone. So yeah.
I guess it turns both anarchic and very democratic.
Yeah. I think it's just like there's just this undercurrent, but there's just like this general feeling of nihilism in this. Like the old ways don't really suit us anymore. It's this cool new way. Let's just go all into that. And the people that are into it are all into it. You know, it's like, myself included. I've gone way down the rabbit hole, but just like you see these ways of solving problems in a slightly better way, and you're like, well, why would you do it that way anymore? And I think that is the barrier, and it's where we've been very careful to say, like, we understand and respect the way that you do things. Let us frame it in a way that makes sense to you and the way that you want to buy it, and kind of make it backwards compatible in the same way that the software on a phone was almost like backwards compatible with your PC. So it didn't feel like you were jumping off. It just kind of naturally happened. And that there's a knack to that. I think crypto businesses could do that better in general.
It still feels quite sort of niche.
It is still very, very niche. I think it's becoming more mainstream. Like you've got large financial institutions in America now launching a Bitcoin ETF, soon to hopefully be an Ethereum ETF, which is like a very traditional financial product that you can tax for, you can account for, you can buy it from someone like a BlackRock, a Fidelity, a Wisdom Tree, you name it. But is accessing an underlying asset that is like very novel, very new, has the potential to change the way a lot of things work. It's
almost like the programmatic ecosystem.
It's very, very, very similar, which is why I'm so into it, really. It was like two things. I'm like, fuck, these two things are really similar. Like you can take that. And that's what we say. It's like, hey, to people that we speak to, like publishers, advertisers, agencies, it's like the financial mainstream is adopting blockchain, which is like a big paraphrase of the actual specifics, but largely Bitcoins that were created in 2008 are now traded in BlackRock, which is like in 16 years, that's pretty crazy. Yeah. And it's like, there's now a way for publishers to do that and advertise, like you can now adopt blockchain into the mainstream in the same way that the biggest market in the financial market, the biggest market ever is doing. Like you have the chance to now do that. And some people do really lean in. Other people are like, yeah, it's not for us right now. And that's fine. It's like on us to message slightly different. And I think that's where you and I have conversations all the time about like kind of trying to change people's behaviors. And it's tough, but I think you just got to persevere because ultimately the juice is worth the squeeze, I think.
Yeah, although it's quite tiring.
It is quite tiring, yeah.
I really wish sometimes I'm just like, God, wish I'd, I was at The Guardian, someone just phoned me up with like a bunch of 25/4s and I could just book them on. Done.
Yeah.
I'm joking. Yeah. That would be so boring.
We've covered a lot. I think all we're missing is the future. So if you kind of look into your mystic ball, like what do you think is going to happen for the rest of this year? And I'll leave that quite open-ended because we've covered a lot, so you can pull on one of the many threads that are now this last hour.
Yeah, I think so. Within my sector, specifically within sustainability, there's a huge breakthrough has been made in terms of standards for measuring open web becoming sort of agreed upon.
Nice.
Which should help answer, and that's through SRI and GARM sort of working together on that, which should hopefully tick the box of it's not perfect. It hasn't been perfect up to this point. And I think the different companies within this space, of which there are probably now 4 or 5, will be able to have that standard as that's your bare minimum, right? Whatever you modify on top of that is added bonus. So hopefully that sort of tackles the obsession with perfection in an imperfect industry. Tick. I think my biggest challenge is making sure that prioritizing sustainability doesn't become just that was 2023's trend. There are, there's regulation coming in the EU and in America. There are commitments to the Paris Climate Accord, the 17 UN SDGs by 2030, right? Those aren't going away. The biggest companies in the world signed up to those. And sustainability isn't just green. It's, it's every aspect of society. It's, an end to poverty. It's access to education. It's equality for women. It's all these things, right? Which again feels quite esoteric and quite weird when it comes down to your day-to-day job as a media buyer.
Buying MPUs, yeah.
It's like, how are my leaderboards gonna change the world?
One at a time, I would say,
So, and I think, we're almost halfway through the decade, and Jesus Christ, we're almost halfway through the decade, and though those targets become more and more at risk the longer we take to just get our asses in gear. So sustainability needs to be a mainstay in pretty much all decision making, right? Because it's not like the year of the mobile. It's not like the year of AI. It's not like blockchain, in terms of like flavors of the month, in terms of what's the latest thing that we're all going to obsess about and then not do anything about.
Yeah.
Or hopefully this sector, this area of discussion and behavior change is fundamental to absolutely everything that we do within this industry, I believe, because when you prioritize sustainability, you get the knock-on benefits multiply.
Yeah, like you described with the Nature Valley campaign. Yeah,
but also you save money on your ad serving.
Yeah.
You you improve the load time of your creatives. You drive more, therefore viewability and attention, et cetera, all those other ambient benefits that come. You prioritize better publishers. And so therefore your advertising has more meaning for the people that see it on those better publishers, et cetera, et cetera. All those things, ultimately, when you put a sustainability lens across them, it's supply path optimization, right? But that saves the planet. Or at least tries to, right?
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, right? I think for me, I get really sort of like, we're not doing enough as an industry. We've got to change the world. We can only be responsible for what we do within this sector. But when we talk about the power of actual good advertising and not just how it's delivered, but the ability to change minds and change the trajectory of things, the power, advertising at its core is about driving behavior change.
Yeah, very true.
And I think we need to remember that as well. Yes, it's just ads and we're getting people to buy more stuff. But if we can get people to buy stuff more conscientiously and potentially pay more because it aligns with a person's values and about where they want to spend their money, then I think we're onto a pretty good thing.
Yeah.
And I think what we need to do this year more of, now that we've sort of had the get measuring chat, which was, 2022 and 2023, let's do something about it now. And that's what I'm hoping will happen this year.
Yeah.
3 months in, after January was like 84 years long.
Yeah.
And now everything else is just like, oh God, we're at the end of Q1, shit.
I think it's I'm enjoying it. Like there's a tree that's getting leaves on and I've never seen the leaves on that tree. I'm quite excited to see them. Because it's opposite my desk, but anyway. So yeah, bring on Q2 is what that's the roundabout way of me getting to that. And I think, thank you for coming on. This has been great. Really enjoyed it. I think we've covered just about everything and probably set the world to right now.
None of Millie's talking points.
Yeah, there was a few of them. All we were missing, we should have sat in the back of a taxi and had a taxi driver pile in as well, because we really would have set it all to right.
In my day.
Yeah, it's been brilliant. Thank you very much. An
electric taxi.
Yeah. My favourite. Thank you for coming down.
My
really
pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers. Thanks everyone.